It's the Security Weekly News from Frankfurt. It is Friday, the 27th day of June. June is almost over. As you already start, back to school special. We're still here in Frankfurt, so we'll be back next week. I've got for you today, Broadcom is coming for you, Direct Send, N0auth, UNFI, Cisco, Oneclik, Russ Beauchemin, and more on this episode of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News. Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits, is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps, just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step toward total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/threatlocker today. All right, here at episode 489 of the Security Weekly News, I'm Doug White. Hit that like and subscribe button and leave a comment, or I'm going to send around a couple of guys to collect. You know what I mean. Yeah, you degenerate gambler, you. Direct Send. So I actually didn't know what this was, but I went and read about it. So this is a Microsoft feature for 365 that was designed to allow printers, apps. I mean, at the end of the reading of it, they started off like this was for, like special devices, and it just kind of kept getting crazier. Like pretty much everything could send direct messages. So the idea was, this is like an old message system on a mainframe. You could send out a broadcast message that says, hey, everybody, we're going down for maintenance in 15 minutes. Save your work. Yeah. So basically, in this case, cloud-based things, apps, printers, whatever, can send messages on their own behalf or the behalf of the company out to everybody. So, hey, Bob, can you print those IKEA constructions, double-sided? You do know that you can do that, right? Well, so this thing apparently can be abused to allow someone to relay a message via the tenant smart host to look like it originated inside the domain. So they basically can bounce it off this smart host, and then it looks like it came from, inside the house. So it requires no authentication. And, so Kevin in Lagos can send you a message that looks like it came from Bob at carwash.com. Microsoft recommended, so you may want to evaluate whether you have this or not, but Microsoft recommends that only advanced users, whatever that means, use this feature. Like, great, let's add features that, average users can't use. And that they said to ensure that the smart host is properly locked down. All good advice. Varonis went on and said that this is now a major phishing campaign. It is targeting mostly American companies, and it started in May 2025. The attacks get sent from a PowerShell script, and then, but they look like an internal message. And some of there were all kinds of them, but some of the ones said things like caller left a VM and things like that. And then when you open it, it basically has a QR code. And that takes you to a fake Microsoft login page. It's like, oh, please log in to view this message. And well, you know how that goes. I mean, I hate QR codes anyway, right? Want to see our menu? Scan and click. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, did somebody just stick this on the table? Did somebody stick another QR code over the top of a QR code that was already there? I don't like those things. Varonis is recommending setting reject direct send in the Exchange Admin Center. So this sounded to me like the most obvious thing to do. And this would, of course, prevent these devices from sending legitimate messages too, of course. I would also advise you to reiterate to your people how dangerous it is to, chase after QR codes. We're all getting very, used to that. every restaurant you go to, everything you go to, every show you go to, click the QR code for instructions, whatever. So you want to remind them that these things can be exceedingly dangerous. UNFI. Now, you probably never heard of this company. I honestly never heard of this company, but they are a huge logistics concern that are responsible for delivering things to a lot of other things. So, which you probably haven't heard of them. It's kind of like Cisco, the Cisco with SYSCO kind of thing. You like, yeah, maybe you've seen those trucks and you're going, did they misspell that? And I didn't know what it was for a long time. And then I realized it was something else entirely. Now, in this case, it's Whole Foods. And Whole Foods had systems offline and so forth. And I won't get, and you can read the story if you want all the details of what happened to Whole Foods, but I wanted to use the story once again to remind you about Augustus de Morgan. Big fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them. And, I say that a lot, but I think you should print that on one big piece of wood and hang it in your sock. I mean, do you really understand all your data flows? I mean, this is sort of my concern. When Robbie's guaranteed crayfish supply, who wrote this, connects to your system, to ensure that you can order all the crayfish you want to make etouffee. Well, is Robbie's system secured as well? Have you ensured that the weakness over there at the crayfish factory doesn't become a weakness that transfers into your system? And more of these types of supply chain attacks are becoming just profound problem. Is the Powderville Sheriff's Office connected to the state police databases, and those are connected to the FBI, and the ankle bone's connected to the leg bone, and the leg bone's connected to the hip bone, and big fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them? So don't forget Zero Trust. Just because it's a third-party provider who you've known for years doesn't mean that their systems are any good, and they probably aren't. So you need to understand those data flows and controls. We saw this in audit all the time. System A was locked down like a Republican voter with a flat top haircut in 1968. So, my dad. System B is a hippie with scabies. Put them in a hotel room together and you get, a really interesting hotel room in Topeka, Kansas in 1968, directed by David Lynch, RIP. So know your flows. Just remember that. Maybe put that on a piece of wood too. Not a bad idea. N0auth. It's spelled N0auth. It's basically a vulnerability that means if I can guess your email address, I might be able to compromise your software as a service engine. Can I guess your email? Let's see. sam.franklin@samthebutcher.com. Yeah, I could probably figure that out, right? Simpera said that around 9% of the SaaS apps or SaaS apps, I'll say it German style, SaaS apps, SaaS, that they tested were vulnerable to this flaw, which could allow remote access. So basically, someone has to be able to access the intra-tenant, and apparently that's pretty easy. And then once they do that, if they can guess the email, they can take over the entire account. Now, they have to have local access, but getting bernie.hapshat@samthebutcher.com is probably not that hard. And then finding bernie.hapshat in some other database and that bernie.hapshat used the password big meat 1234 on all their accounts. And Bernie has an account at mrfufu.com and that got compromised 15 times last year. Well, once they have Bernie's local login, they can use this N0auth trick to move laterally, access other accounts, and they just can jump around until they find one because they will be able to access everything that account has privileges to. Yikes. So it may be time to think about email as OSINT. People never really think about it like that. It's kind of like giving out your home address and stuff. People used to do that all the time, and people give out their emails, but you can guess anybody's email domain, right? If you know where they work. So how do you fix this? Well, if you want to read more about the attack, obviously it's in the article. You need multi-factor. That's a start. You need to start preaching password hygiene to get people to not reuse passwords so that you don't lose that initial access point. Because somebody right now at your organization is using goatsucker1234 as a password, on 50 different sites, and 49 of those have already been compromised and 3 of them were financials. So it's just a matter of time. They're going to get you with this stuff. So start thinking about how to deal with that. Cisco issued warnings about a flaw in identity services. So that would be bad. And it is scored as a 10, which makes it special bad. Now, there's two flaws that are part of this whole thing. And one of them is in Cisco Identity Services Engine, the other is in the Passive Identity Connector System. So this is all about how you can log into things. And apparently these two flaws, when put together, could allow someone to not only get to the device, but they can remotely get root. Oh, yeah. Cisco said there are no mitigations to these flaws except to patch. So I'm just going to, I'll use this story to reiterate that horror show of network infrastructure patch management that makes patching servers look like sucking down a liver dumpling at a restaurant in Kaiserslautern last night, which is very easy and good. Like, don't miss that. People go, ooh, liver dumpling, don't eat that. I'm like, oh, I'll have yours, thank you. Patching network infrastructure sucks. It always has. It may mean downtime. It's hard to test. It takes it takes big throbbing nerves to hit, the button at 3:35 a.m. on Saturday night and hope that by 8 a.m. on Monday, you have everything patched and everything is running and it's all working and everybody's back in business and no one was the wiser. You hope. Now, I will tell you one thing that we recommended, which made me sound like Dr. Moneybags McGee, in conducting my, tone deaf seminar number 5. But just think about it. The idea was to have redundant architecture, so basically warm swap. And I know some of you have this and some of you have hot swap architectures, but not everybody has things like this. But think about a backup plan that you could rotate in. So this was our backup plan for a network patch when things go wrong. And so what are you going to do when this all fails? And, it's now 4 a.m. on Monday morning and, we got to be up in 4 hours. Do you have a way to rotate some warm equipment back in, maybe an older Cisco router that you were using that you've already patched? And you may be able to do this kind of rotating patch so that you didn't have that downtime. Wasn't popular with clients, but it was very popular with Cisco sales reps, let me tell you. But regardless of this, my point is not to tell you what hardware to buy, but you need to think about your network infrastructure patch plans, time to service, and so forth. Something is going to come along that you're going to have to handle. It's going to have to be done. And you don't want to be that company that's still sitting there with one old 2621 router that's running 5 versions back of iOS. And now we desperately need to patch. And it's like the day of the big sales rollout and the new user demonstration. Yeah, that you know those days. Well, I love open source, but I also love to be able to interact with the rest of the business world. It's a tricky, fine line. Open source, it's often had a bad rep for relying on that one guy in IT that could set up Linux and open office. That would have been me. And then, he quit and then a new person had no idea. And, and the whole thing kind of folded up and they went right back to office. But we are seeing some progress and we're going to probably get some nice use cases out of stuff that's going on. And that may help people to start at least thinking about whether or not they want to, put all their virtual eggs in one virtual basket. I mean, Microsoft's kind of wormed its way into every corner of operations like a parasitic worm you got from eating street food from that cart on 34th Street that really smelled good. No, this is coming from a person who ate doner kebab from a trailer house next to a produce market I saw on the side of the road yesterday in some little town down beside Heidelberg. But Lyon, France, that's the city government in a move that they said was to reduce reliance on American software, made this big move. They're moving everything by mandate to Linux, PostgreSQL, OnlyOffice, which I'm not familiar with, but it's a Latvian new license office software. And they're also going to use Open Video Territory, which I guess is French because the name of it was in French, but I translated it. So that's a video conferencing and automation suite. So, I mean, plenty of people tried this before. I've talked with companies and so forth. I've set up Open Office for people that just couldn't afford Microsoft licenses and whatnot. Linux is really viable now, even for end user desktops. It's small. It runs on older equipment. I don't know, but most of my employers are currently using Office 365, Adobe, and a lot of people getting sucked into Teams, and that's the only thing we use. So I don't know, but I think it's something you should keep in mind because at some point Microsoft may well turn around and say, "Okay, we're going to jack the price up," and you may not be able to afford it anymore. So maybe have some alternate paths that you at least sort of have in mind as a backup plan, or hey, go for it. A new campaign called Oneclik is targeting the energy sector. It uses the feature of Microsoft called ClickOnce, and it uses Golang backdoors as a means to get back into the system. So ClickOnce, if you're not familiar with it, is a Microsoft tool that assists with updating and downloading and updating new things that came out with .NET 2.0. And I mean, basically, this minimizes user involvement in updates. So that's, of course, a good thing. It just happens. They don't even know what happened. It's just nice and seamless. But as we keep simplifying and unifying everything down into one big Microsoft wad, we, also mean we have a really nice place to target pretty much everything. It's the same problem with single sign-on, right? I mean, most of us would say it would be better if you signed on 35 times a day to all these different things you use, but most people want to be like, I want to sign in once and be done with it. Um, so basically, what happens here is this is an updater. And if you could get that updater to load something nasty, well, that could be bad. So ClickOnce apps, when they're running properly, they have limited permissions, and they do use a piece of software called DF service or dfsvc.exe as a means to load updates. So that sounds okay. But what happens is this malware uses several techniques to get shell code pushed into memory locations where it can do whatever it wants. And then it is able to communicate with the command and control server and download. And this helps to obfuscate it because it looks like this regular updating process. So there have already been multiple variants of this out since March. It appears to be Chinese in origin, but they didn't give anybody credit for it as yet other than Chinese. So as ever, you probably are going to have to, caution yourself about allowing things to phone home, monitoring that kind of stuff, outbound connects and so forth. And be careful about these long chains of things that allow other things, and then those things can sideload bad things kind of situations in Augustus de Morgan again. The article's worth a read if you are a Microsoft shop or, just in general, because you're interested in how this can be used to hurt you. Well, so the conference I'm attending is the European Cyber Warfare Conference, and I saw a presentation yesterday about this, and then right here today, imagine that, there was a story. They were talking about how AI is basically starting to destroy the Western democratic process. How's it doing this? Basically by making it so easy to create misinformation, deep fakes, and so forth. And all this stuff can be created faster than our aging brains and even more aged politicians can actually handle it. So, I mean, basically what they mean is that it's growing so difficult for people like voters to process the news that they're all becoming disenfranchised and distrustful of the whole thing. Could I be an AI bot right now being run by the Duchy of Grand Fenwick for purposes of subverting the technical news? It's possible. And, we see U.S. government officials now citing non-existent sources to convince people not to get vaccinated and to justify their positions. Guess what? Probably hallucinated by an AI. A deep fake of politician X found incapacitated in a van with 4 live wombats and a brick of cocaine. True? Not true. It probably sounds like something we'll see pretty soon. I mean, the whole world is basically being catfished by all this. In the recent Canadian elections, AI generated photos showed one of the top candidates in a hot tub with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I know some of our actual politicians now have been in hot tubs with Mr. Epstein, but some of them have not. That video of me with Fidel Castro, not real. Or is it? Who knows? But the story said that there's currently evidence that over 50 recent elections were being manipulated by AI intervention. And that's pretty scary. The presentation I saw yesterday had a lot more than that being talked about. So if we all lose faith in a democratic process, what replaces it? Wintermute? If you don't get Neuromancer references, I'm really sorry. You need to read Neuromancer. I do think William Gibson was on, to something with this. It may not be long for the AIs just go, we can manipulate these people to no end just by creating all this imagery and convincing them their favorite soccer team is on drugs. It's all pretty scary. But speaking of artificial humans, the original artificial transhumanist himself, it's Russ Beauchemin, who is also here in Frankfurt. So, hi, Russ, from exciting Rhode Island College.
Hey, Doug, thanks for having me. I want to, before I get started on peripheral security, I just want to take a moment, have a moment of silence, and maybe tip one out for our friend Microsoft's BSOD. that is being retired in the upcoming update for Microsoft Windows 11. So, all those nights of, updating drivers on my old video cards for my gaming rigs and not being able to use them for 3 days because I couldn't get any information out of the error message that was seen at the memory address in the BSOD, good riddance. But, rest in pieces, I hope. So, which brings us to peripheral security. And before I go into the article discussion, I just want to tell a quick story. So before we left for Frankfurt, I had a call from a friend of mine who owns a small restaurant. Actually, I have a few friends that own restaurants, but this particular friend for this particular restaurant had asked me an opinion about upgrading his Office MFP, multifunction printer, to a newer model. The model that he had was about, I don't know, 15 years old. And so he had said, or asked me, he says, "Hey, Russ, I got a really good deal on this particular printer. Should I go with it?" And I looked at it and I said, "Yeah, actually, the model's, 3 to 5 years old. It's faster. It's better. Builder, it's faster, stronger. There we go. Daft Punk. But he said, he asked me, "Hey, is it secure? Is it this and that and the other?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead and do it." He got a really good deal on it. It was at auction. The agent was an actual service person for this particular model. I won't get into names. And he refurbished it, oiled it, did everything that he needed to do with it, lubricated the gears, adjusting the splines or recalculating splines, and so on and so forth. And so they delivered the printer and everything. And I went to, the day before I left, I went to configure it on the network and all that kind of stuff. And it was great and everything, right? But wouldn't you know, the person who delivered it, again, IT professional, did not work for the specific manufacturer of the printer, but nonetheless delivered the printer. And in order to adjust the internal settings of the printer on the touchscreen, I needed to know the password so that I could gain admin access. He had written the password down on a sticky note, posted it on the wall above the printer, and turns out I didn't need it anyway. First of all, I was doing remote configuration. Secondly, it was the default admin password. Go figure. And guess how I got that? Google. Which brings us to which brings us to this article that was posted about 36 hours ago from Rapid7, reporting that they found 8 vulnerabilities affecting over 700 models of printers. The big brand or manufacturer was Brother, but it also affected Ricoh, Konica Minolta, Toshiba, and so on and so forth. These particular vulnerabilities, one being critical, indicated in CVE. These vulnerabilities affected both enterprise and SOHO slash consumer grade devices. So I don't know how many consumers are running network-based printers or MFPs at their house, but I am. So that's at least one out of 8.2-ish billion or somewhere around there. These vulnerabilities can be exploited by themselves, or as we'll see in a few minutes with a few of the other vulnerabilities of the 8 that were discovered, they can be coupled with other already disclosed vulnerabilities, and they can use these vulnerabilities to do things like bypass device authentication, obtain default credentials for administrator password. That's what we're going to focus on today, or potentially gain remote administrative access to the device, or a combination of all three. One of the vulnerabilities works by decoding the default password generation procedure, which is, basically an algorithm, or rather, it's a process. They refer to it, not an algorithm, but a process by which Brother or the manufacturer, one of the ones that were mentioned for these vulnerabilities, uses to generate the default password, which incorporates, guess what? The device's serial number. Go figure. And it creates the default administrative password from that information in the manufacturing process. All right. Some of the other discovered vulnerabilities of the 8 could be exploited to also conduct DOS attacks, denial of service attacks. They could trigger Stack overflows, or they could perform arbitrary HTTP requests. All right, so this is not good. And in addition, it's not just the printer that becomes vulnerable; it's also all the other devices on the network that can host or respond to or receive HTTP requests. While many of these vulnerabilities, they were reported by Rapid7 to the manufacturers, and the manufacturers have been responsive to them and have released patches for at least 7 of them. Unfortunately, one of the vulnerabilities cannot be patched by firmware and needs to be addressed in the manufacturing process. And I bet you can already guess which one that is. So Brother has suggested a workaround for the unpatchable one, which obviously is the one related to the assignment of the default password based on serial number. All right. So guess what the workaround was? And I'll give you 2 seconds. Okay. So if you guessed, change the default administrative password before you put the printer in production, then you win the 2025 Common Sense Award. All right. If you don't leave the device configured, as the manufacturer had done when it left the factory, then you have a potential solution to the unpatchable. All right. So obviously, when my friend called me to come and configure the printer, the first thing I did was change the password, the default admin password. Actually, I got rid of the admin and I created a whole new administrative account and disabled the one that was in there, which is also a good practice. But at least that printer is no longer susceptible to this type of vulnerability. We can sit here and blame companies for implementing poor password generation procedures all day, but that won't really get us anywhere. As responsible consumers and users, we really should get in the habit of engaging in the behavior of changing default passwords for every device. I mean, in my classes, I talk about and I show the default router password.com websites and things like that post all of that to downloadable tables, searchable tables, index tables, and things like that. So all you need to know is the model or even just the name, and you can get the default username and password for the networking device. While we can't accurately determine the number of vulnerable devices that are in use today related to these CVEs, we can make some loose inferences. So, an example in 2021, Brother reported roughly a 10.7% share of the global printer and copier market. This equated to roughly about 5.7 billion in annual revenue that year. Fast forward to 2024, and Brother reports approximately 6 billion in sales with a 9.8% market share on printers. So any way you slice it, we're looking at roughly 10% of the printing market for Brother, and that's just Brother alone. I didn't even do any research on analytics for or sales data, trending data for the other ones like Ryko and Konica Minolta, but 10% for just Brother alone. Okay, that's a lot of printers, no matter how you look at it, and that's a lot of potentially vulnerable devices. So, get in the habit of changing your default passwords. Try to create backup or disable the built-in admin account. Basic common sense stuff, and replace it with one that you create, which has a complex password at the very least. Or maybe just don't put it on the internet. Right? I disable remote administration on all the printers. I remote directly in from the local network, but I don't allow it wide area. It's segmented on its own LAN anyway. So those are some of the things that you can do to protect yourself against vulnerabilities like this, because this is not the first, and it certainly won't be the last that we see. So back to you, Doug.
Thanks, Russ. Private VLANs. You can even do cloud-based private VLANs. So you could literally put all your printers in a cloud-based private VLAN and you could access them remotely, but nobody else could. So please, 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 private VLANs. I was talking about that at the conference yesterday. So yeah. So I told them, I said, I talk about that on the show all the time. So look it up. All right. I actually had a perpetual license from VMware for a long time. I really did. I had this former student who is now deceased. Thank you very much. Before you start looking for him, I had a former student who worked there and got me one. And, thanks. It did stop working quite a while ago, and we had to roll into an academic program, which was then stopped by Broadcom when they took over. So, yeah, I don't use it at all now. But now, apparently, good old Broadcom is sending audit letters and cease and desist orders to people who have those kind of licenses who did not renew their service contracts. I don't know what the ins and outs of this are. Talk to your corporate legal about it. But I mean, basically what they're saying is in 2023, after they took over VMware, they stopped selling perpetual licenses at all. You could no longer purchase these things. And I don't know exactly what the ins and outs of them are. I did not have a service contract. I just had a perpetual license. But they told people now that if they have a perpetual license, they must subscribe to their service agreements. Well, if you didn't buy the service plan, they are now coming after you. The service contracts were not cheap. And a lot of people said, wow, we can't afford this. And they stopped using the service plan and just kept using updates and so forth, but they didn't renew. So they're starting to run audits to find who you are. So I'm just warning you. And so if you're using perpetual licenses and you don't have service contracts, or even if you do, you may want to talk to your rep about what does this all mean. Or Proxmox is pretty nice. That's what I'm using now. That's the news. I will be back, if they let me in, to the United States next week. So I will see you then on the Security Weekly News, or I'll probably still be in Frankfurt because they won't let me in. So, you just never know what may happen. Thanks for watching. See you then. Thanks, Russ.